What goes through your mind when you hear the word hospital? For many people, they would say something related to sickness, about the tireless work that is often underappreciated, or the way a patient's condition can cause happiness and sadness to flip positions on a moment's notice. Yet for me, my first thought was, and will continue to be, the 9-season-long comedy series, Scrubs. Scrubs aired on October 2nd, 2001, and is set in the day-to-day life of medical professionals at Sacred Heart Hospital, a setting used to follow the struggle of balancing out the issues of having a life in what is ultimately an incredibly stressful career, which was all led by sitcom veteran Bill Lawrence, creator of Spin City, Cougar Town, and co-creator of Clone High. Although each independent show would be considered good or even great in their own right, Scrubs stood out above the rest. Scrubs is definitely in my top 5 favorite shows, and it might very well be my favorite. The reason for this ranges from an incredibly charming, well-developed cast, some of the best visual gags seen on a sitcom, and world building that gives the show an air of believability. Yet it all pales in comparison to the show's biggest strength, its ability to perfectly combine the hilarity of its main cast and the gut-wrenching moments of working in a hospital. Also to remind the audience that working in a hospital is not fun, that the comedy does not come from the actual hospital setting, but by how the characters develop over the course of the show, as well as keeping the audience aware that the characters are flawed by having the X-ray accidentally placed backwards. That attention to detail was shown throughout its run, from the use of recurring background characters making the setting seem alive, to the inventive use of camera work for both narrative purposes and clever transitions. Yet when I'm asked which episode someone should start off with, I always point them to Season 1, Episode 4, My Old Lady. It's a perfect representation of everything Scrubs has to offer in terms of character development, presentation, notable side characters, and the emotional depth that the show would improve upon further down the line, which was clearly noticed by the masses, often cited in top 10 episode lists, and was nominated for an Emmy Award back in 2002. While later episodes may have better emotional gut punches or are more elaborate in their storytelling, My Old Lady is my personal recommended starting point. While the first 3 episodes of Season 1 revolved around the stress-induced situations that interns first go through, it wasn't until My Old Lady that the show tackled the most frightening topic of all, mortality. Reinforced by JD's narration after the opening credits that relates a hard-hitting truth about hospital attendees. 1 out of every 3 patients tend to die. This immediately sets up the mystery of which 3 patients will pass away by the end of the episode, meaning that the narrative will be focused on each individual character's interactions with their patients to build familiarity until one of them is chosen. And it uses this theme to strengthen out each of the main character's biggest flaws: fear of death, emotional detachment, and insecurity. JD's fear of death is heightened by giving him the most nurturing character out of all the patients, which goes in line with his admittedly sensitive nature and need to find a solution to every problem.
Right now, we need to be worried about your mother, your grandmother, I'm sorry, we haven't met him. Dr. Dorian. You're very cute.
Turk, his best friend on the other hand, fears having any sort of emotional connection with his patients, as it's considered easier to perform surgery without any emotional baggage to get in the way.
I got a hernia patient to take care of.
What's his name?
Well, his name is hernia patient, but we've gotten close, so I like to call him hernia.
A trait conflicted by having his patient actively seeking to make a connection with him for the episode's first act. While Elliot's insecurity and social awkwardness lead to an inability to make decisions, an absolutely necessary trait in any medical field.
Mrs. Guerrero is a 40-year-old lupus patient who presented with shortness of breath, so I started her on a heparin drip and ordered a VQ scan. Just wanted to run that by you. I'm gonna order an ABG just to be safe. What do you think? I increased the heparin to 1,500 units per hour. Does that sound like enough?
All of which is heightened by having a heated passive-aggressive relationship with the show's primary nurse, Carla. In fact, the majority of these issues are actually showcased within the opening segment.
Carl, could you just let it go?
No, I don't want to let it go. It's a simple question. Why wouldn't I want to go to the symphony?
No, I didn't mean anything by it.
Of course you meant something by it.
Judging by the initial dialogue, the audience is already given details relating to each character. Elliot is a socially awkward, somewhat racial stereotyping woman who tends to put her foot in her mouth, while Carla is headstrong and straightforward, but tends to overreact and make mountains out of molehills. Which is when the perspective switches to JD and Turk, filling the audience in on not only their relationship, but how Elliot and Carla relate to them.
You've got to do something about this.
No, we really don't.
Come on, Carla's your girlfriend, Elliot's my friend.
Dude, trust me. Don't get involved.
JD is shown to be caring and sympathetic, but Turk, being the rational, cool-headed of the two, reinforces that JD tends to try and fix issues that are not his problem, setting up each of their major flaws within the first 30 seconds. This theme of flaws in stressful situations is reinforced throughout the episode. For example, the audience is given details about who Turk is and how surgeons deal with their patients by having them treat them as nothing more than a checklist, indicated by the low point of view shot as they hover over the patient in a claustrophobic fashion. Yet when we go back to JD's side of the story, we see his flaw confronted not by a medical issue, but rather a decision. His patient, Mrs. Tanner, is in the beginning stages of kidney failure, and when he attempts to put her on dialysis, to his surprise, she says the unthinkable.
I think I'm ready to die.
Leading to not only his toughest realization, but the episode's funniest moment.
I've got a ton of bricks for Dr. Dorian.
Leading into the second act, each individual character is then forced to confront their flaws head on. Turk eventually begins to treat David as a person and bonds with him quite naturally, spending time watching sports and goofing off in the hospital hallways. Yet during a surgical procedure, David is found to have an untreated lymphoma node. The risk of surgery is high, but is likely an early stage. Yet it's this decision that causes Turk to look inward, to be able to open up emotionally and tell David the true severity of his condition. Elliot's patient doesn't allow her to have such downtime, however. As her condition rapidly gets worse, she attempts to give herself time to make a decision, leading to one of her best scenes.
I've been trying to decide what drink to get. I've been standing here trying to choose between cherry soda and ginger ale. And you know what? It's a toss-up. I mean, either way, I get a cold drink, right? And it would be almost impossible for me to kill someone with this decision, but I still can't make it. I think I'm in trouble here.
Not only does this scene firmly establish Elliot's understanding of her biggest flaw, but it also allows Carla to open up about hers as well, which leads to JD and Mrs. Tanner's final scene. JD's entire goal is to convince Mrs. Tanner to get the help that she needs to stay alive. From attempting to receive advice from his boss, Dr. Cox, to making a long-form bucket list, he's attempting to stall her death in any way, shape, or form. And while the pilot did have JD wrestle with the idea of having patients die under his care, My Old Lady's main point is about having him come to terms with the reality that not everything is preventable. To understand at the end of the day the decision lies with the patient, and if said patient wants to die, he has to support it, no matter how difficult it may be, alongside the mental fortitude needed to work in such a field. Having sentimentality is absolutely necessary, but you cannot let it consume you.
Now, aren't there other patients you need to be seeing?
Me? No, I've been off for 2 hours.
So with your precious free time, you've been sitting in a hospital room talking to an old lady. What about your list? How many of those things have you done? For that matter, how many times you've sat on the grass and done nothing? You need to start taking some time for yourself, young man. Promise me you'll do that.
This leads to the emotional climax of the episode, where JD finally admits his fear to Mrs. Tanner, and in a brilliant twist, has a dying patient comfort the doctor.
Are you okay?
I'm scared.
Come here. Come here. Come here.
Unfortunately, Mrs. Tanner isn't the only one to pass away, giving way to the show's unflinching attitude about death, that no matter the statistics, and no matter how early you treat an issue, some days will be worse than others. The episode bookends its theme of mortality by proving that sometimes, as a doctor, you will have low moments hit you out of nowhere. To showcase that if a doctor cannot handle having a patient die, make a decision, or understand that their patients need comfort, then they're not going to go far. Yet as long as you learn what to do better, and apply those lessons to your next patient, you will continue to improve. Scrubs was one of a kind. While medical shows are a dime a dozen, Scrubs stood out from the crowd. It made sure that the audience felt warm and laughed at the absurdities of its main cast, while never failing to remind them of where they worked. To remind ourselves to face our biggest fears, no matter how difficult it may be. To understand that, like in life, our highest highs are often alongside our lowest lows. And it's this combination of comedy and tragedy that makes Scrubs one of my favorite shows of all time.